Hello, babes, and welcome to another episode of Author Reading Her Own Book because she can't afford to get audiobooks done. This is my book that I'm reading here called The Irregulars. It is the second book in my trilogy, The Northwest Uprising, and I am reading them out loud because I have a friend who needs audiobooks, but I can't afford to get audiobooks of these, so I'm reading them out loud for her. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you're brand new here, welcome. Uh, just so you know, I don't edit these things because my friend thinks it's funny when I make mistakes. Now that we have housekeeping out of the way, we are on chapter 7 of The Irregulars. If you're brand new here again, you might want to start with the Rebels, or at least with the prologue and chapter 1 of The Irregulars. I will have links to those playlists below. So here we go. The Irregulars Chapter 7. I walked at the head of an uneven line of fighters, following a grassy trail surrounding an overgrown cornfield. Scouts ranged to the sides, almost a mile out in some cases, watching our flanks and finding a route for us to follow. Reaching out, I trailed my fingertips over the rough, broad, yellow leaves of a corn stalk. Left to itself, the corn surprised me. Most of it couldn't reseed itself, but the odd plant here and there managed, so the dead field had random clusters of newer corn interspersed with bushy weeds whose names I didn't know. The blue-green leaves provided a pretty contrast to the gold of the dead corn. One benefit? We could see over the weeds, so Steve should clearly be visible. Bad news? Steve could see us too, hence the scouts. After enduring 3 days of pouring rain, I enjoyed the watery sunlight, even if the breeze carried the promise of more rain by nightfall. Staying on the wet ridge of grass took some doing, but I really didn't want to slip into the thick mud again. I'd only just gotten the last of it off my boots. We were deep in the Willamette Valley, farther than we'd dared go since the invasion. There'd been sign of Steve out on foot. Maybe work details. So we'd left half the crew with the vehicles to see what chaos they could cause while we went out on foot just to fuck with Steve. I cocked my head, something off about our surroundings, but unable to tell what it was. Holding up a hand to call a halt, I turned in a slow circle. No strange sounds. The few winter birds chirped and swooped, unalarmed by humans. "What is it?" Sparrow, right behind me, whispered. Once the trophy wife of a wealthy judge or something, she'd since become our explosives expert. It always fascinated me how people developed interests far beyond what you'd expect. She looked like she'd been a model and had done what was expected of her during her marriage. Things like playing tennis, hosting parties, working out at the gym. Once free of those expectations, she'd become a satisfactory fighter and enthralled by making shit go boom. Flipping fantastic. The entire line, which had been in relaxed silence, went tense and wary the instant I called a halt. Now they crouched, peering across the fields, weapons in hand. Not sure. On my next breath, I caught a scent. Raising my head, I sniffed the air like a hound, following the smell to the south. Whatever it was, we were downwind of it. Gunpowder. Finally, I had it. "That could be any one of us, too," Sparrow murmured. "Not like this. Not that direction." I waved, signaling them to hide. Now I knew why it took me so long to recognize the odd scent. I'd always smelled it freshly burned, right after firing a gun. This was muted. An ambush? Unlikely. Our purpose was to stir up some shit and pull them away from our mountains. Steve couldn't figure out where we were heading to ambush us if we didn't even know where we were going. "Do you believe Steve is close?" Sparrow fiddled with some small bottles and cloth. "Probably. We should say hi." Towards the back of the line, people began shifting. Storm soon came crawling to the front, her curly, strawberry blonde hair hidden under a knit cap to help her blend into her surroundings. Storm was the scout working the southern flank. "How's Steve?" I asked. Her blue eyes widened in surprise. "Think we should pay him a visit?" "I was just coming to tell you that Steve invited us." The young woman recovered quickly. a gleam of laughter in her eyes. "They're bored and lonely, just across the field there." She pointed slightly ahead and off to the south. "Well, it'd be rude of us to come all this way and not stop by." Sparrow smiled at the younger woman, all sharp edges and anticipation. I pulled the map out. "Tell me about the landscape. I need to see." I bowled into an enemy soldier, knocking him flat and kicking him in the head before turning on a new victim. Their screams were muffled by the low clouds, and the familiar burnt scent of gunpowder filled my nostrils. I spun, taking in the fight. Smoke drifted across the field, created by Sparrow's tiny Molotov cocktails. We'd spread out, smaller individual fights spawning off the first melee. Spotting Steve about to shoot one of my people, I palmed a compact pistol, firing rapidly, taking down as many enemies as I could before the fight shifted, swallowing me again. Forced back into close range, I holstered the pistol and switched back to 2 short swords. The fight swirled and eddied, bringing me face to face with a soldier. I snarled into his bloody face, slashing high with my right and low with the left. The man dropped with a scream, and I moved on, giving him a hefty kick as I passed. A rifle butt came out of nowhere, knocking my right sword out of my hand. Deadly silent, Archangel appeared next to me, slashing at Steve with his machete. Ahead, a woman struggled amid a group of Steve, her hair obscuring her face. Howling, I abandoned the sword and slammed into the rear of the soldiers, Archangel right beside me. Fighting was never a blur anymore. I'd learned to see through the adrenaline, take advantage of weaknesses. Where to hit, when to stab. It wasn't long before I met the woman, Storm, halfway. She gave me a nod and turned to find a new fight. Soon, I hunted for a fresh target and saw only my own people. Taking in my surroundings, the fight had trampled a circle in the corn and weeds, leaving it full of bloody mud and some bodies. All theirs, I noted. Archangel helped one of his own back up, a mid-20s guy everyone called Game Boy for some reason. "You all right?" he asked, coming over and putting a hand on my shoulder. I nodded, snot running from my nose. I sniffed, coughed explosively, and wiped my nose to find it was blood. Shaking my head, I held a corner of my shirt to stanch the flow. After a minute, I pulled it away and waited cautiously. Not running anymore. So much for a scent of fresh air. Might as well get back to the end of the fight. "All right, sound off. Who's not dead?" That night, and now miles away from the ambush site, Archangel joined me at my tiny camp stove. "So, the way you rescued us is standard operating procedure for you then?" I gave him a guilty smile and hunched my shoulders. "Yes and no. I mean, we don't normally go running around in stupid little scraps of cloth. Are you telling me that flying by the seat of your pants and making shit up as we go isn't a good way to run things?" After the fight, we'd bandaged our hurts, gathered the wounded, blessed the fact that no one was badly injured, and buggered off. We'd found a meadow near a river to spend the night. Now, most of us were spread out, eating and relaxing under cover. Without Sirius here, and Phoenix hanging with Griffin, I spent most of my evenings alone, going over what limited information we had. Having company that didn't require anything from me was wonderfully refreshing. Archangel smothered a laugh. "Don't get me wrong," I continued. "I'd love to have tons of info, know exactly where they are, and basically have the military might of the good old US of A behind us, but we work with what we got. If you have any ideas, I'm all ears. But in my experience, you can make all the plans you want, but fucking Murphy will ruin every single one." "Who's Murphy?" he asked, bewildered. "Is there someone I missed?" I giggled. "Murphy's Law. Though that would have been a good name for Steve, too." "Gotta admit," Archangel got comfortable, pulling out his MRE. "It's pretty damn fantastic having all the intel you need. So, what have you guys done? Lured them into an ambush?" "Yep." "And they're always terrible in the mountains?" "When they're on foot for longer periods of time, yeah." I considered the ambushes. "Going back to setting lures, we've actually done a few different types. If you have women, though, they always follow. Maybe we should up the ante and make the women look less threatening. No obvious weapons or something." The pot lid rattled, steam escaping its edges and temporarily distracting me with making tea to go with dinner. As soon as I poured the water, we got back to the discussion, talking all through the meal. Around us, the camp slowly settled as fighters found their beds, some of them, mostly female, with a couple of pre-approved male-female pairings, doubling up to share warmth. The rain came back and we wrapped up in blankets while we spoke. Later still, after we'd nursed our tea for as long as possible, we continued talking. Silly stuff, like movies, books, favorite foods. I got hung up on desserts. I hadn't had a dessert in over a year. Canned peaches do not count. There was no responsibility, no reining in hot heads, or having to be seen as the fearless leader that Sirius liked to call me. We were just a man and a woman talking over a little fire. Those times when you talk and can't see their faces, that's when it's easiest to share deep thoughts. But this time we kept it light. I was free to study his face, the way his mouth quirked at the corner when he smiled, and I finally saw a tiny dimple nearly hidden in his left cheek. His eyes were shadowed, occasionally revealed as a dark blue glint. He watched me just as intently, but there was no self-consciousness. There couldn't be, not at this tiny little fire in the early evening, not after the fight earlier. A shadow loomed out of the dark, pale skin making her easy to see. "It's a school night," Phoenix whispered. "You both should be in bed by now." Her half-seen hands rested on her hips while she scolded us. "Yes, Mom." Archangel grinned, his teeth white in the dark. I clamped my hands over my mouth to muffle my shout of laughter, toppling slowly over to lie on the ground, squealing and snorting with glee. Archangel looked from Phoenix to me and back again. "I really don't think that was funny." Confusion filled his voice. "She gets weird when she's tired." Phoenix heaved a long-suffering sigh. "Just go to sleep, both of you, or she'll be useless tomorrow." Bedding down was as simple as pillowing my head on my pack. Archangel settled down facing me, a few feet away. The patter of droplets striking the leaves lulled me to sleep. 2 days later, I slid slowly down a steep slope, one hand trailing behind me for balance. All around, rustling in the underbrush and the occasional curse let me know nobody had lost control yet. I dug my heels into the loam to slow myself a little more, checking for landmarks on the hills around. My rifle, the strap securely over my shoulder and across my chest, caught the ground, the butt dragging and knocking against the swords crossed over my back, hitting my head. I cursed, mouthing a whole string of words I didn't dare say out loud. Not this close to our destination. We'd caught up with our trucks, driven a few more hours. Now we'd hidden the vehicles and taken everyone except the drivers up and over 2 ridges to the main highway, 99E, somewhere near Oregon City. This was one of the few roads still in good repair, which meant frequent use. The other side of the 99 was bordered by the Willamette River, and this side was a slope a few degrees away from a cliff, thickly covered in trees and bushes. Steve would never expect an ambush here, mostly because I wasn't sure we'd make it down without giving the game away. I continued my walk slide down, yanking on the bag in my left hand to unstick it from a bush. The contents clinked when it swung back. The damn thing jabbed my leg again. And the contents clinked, and when it swung back, the damn thing jabbed my leg again. Shush, Jay. Again. Half the group remained higher, ready to rain fire down on Steve. A few of us were going all the way to the bottom to lay out a nail strip and landmines. I got the nail strip. At this point, I'd prefer the landmines. My boots touched pavement seconds before the others in our advanced group. "Contact left!" Jewel, positioned on the southern edge, shouted. So much for the plan, then. Low-lying clouds muffled all sound until they'd gotten too close to avoid. Whoopee! Looks like the ambushers just got ambushed. Dumping the strip out, I flung it across the road while Goliath and Jewel opened fire. Steve returned our fire, the large caliber bullets putting holes in the hillside. We backed into the bushes, and the Chimera shot past, over the strip. It spun in a circle before slowing to a halt in the middle of the road, facing the direction they'd just come. In the precious time it took for their gunner to reorient himself, the irregulars hurled themselves into the cover of the trees. Safely ensconced, I positioned myself in time to see another truck appear out of the fog. "Well, fuck me," I commented, sighting on the second Chimera. "Later, for sure." Archangel tossed me a quick grin and nestled his cheek against his rifle stock. What? I choked, staring at him longer than I should have. The second truck wasted no time, firing blindly into the trees. Right at us. A barrage of gunfire strafed the air, forcing us to hunker down. I found myself belly down behind a tree, my rifle underneath me, and no memory of how I'd gotten there. Then I wished my tree was bigger, being barely 10 feet from the road. Bullets whistled past, and all I could do was stay as flat as possible and hope the other half of the irregulars were still above the firing line. A chunk of tree disappeared just above my head, and I flinched. The others. How are they handling this? I hissed and slapped the ground to get the attention of those around me. Sound off! How's everyone doing? Still here. I don't like this. No one does. Pissing my pants, ma'am, Grandpa admitted a few feet to my left. He looked barely old enough to drive, much less join the army. His brown hair, grown long since joining us, lay flat against his skull, but he was smiling as if he found all this fun. I never asked, Gramps, but did you lie to join the army? And if so, was it worth it? Archangel called, grinning even as the bullets flew over his head. Idiots. The only injuries mentioned were caused by flying splinters, and no sooner had the last report come in than I started. A sliver the size of a small branch flew past, grazing the skin above my eye. Fuck! I clapped a hand to my eye, blood running between my fingers. Yo, Captain, coming in! Phoenix dashed in from the rear, going into a full baseball dive and sliding to a stop next to me. How's your eye? Let me see it! It's fine, I grumbled. What the fuck are you doing leaving your cover like that? This is literally a scratch! Macho, macho man, she sang softly, pouring a bit of alcohol from a small flask onto my scratch. Hold still, she scolded. I don't know if we really have time for this. I waved vaguely at the twigs and bits of evergreen falling around our heads, bullets still peppering everything. You do know we're in the middle of something here, right? Just gotta make sure your eye's fine. Phoenix stared intently at my eyebrow and face, turning my head and gently probing with her fingertips. Her eyes fierce. Won't do anybody any good if you're blinded, dumbass. Fucking hell! She shook her head. Half an inch lower and you'd have lost it. Gonna have another nice scar through your eyebrow. At least it's the same eye. My left eyebrow had no luck at all. Or maybe it had tons of luck. 2 near misses. Finally deciding I wasn't in danger of dying from a scratch, she slapped a bandage on it. She's fine, she called, reassuring those who had the attention to spare. Phoenix stayed, plastered to my side, while we waited for a lull in Steve's fire. I kept my face pressed to the base of the tree, one eye on the shapes barely visible through the fog. Finally, the moment we'd been waiting for happened. The barrage paused. A quick twist and I had the rifle in front of me, stocked firmly against my shoulder. I fired first, the others joining in. We didn't waste time shooting at the armored sides. No. We shot out their tires, radiators, and kept the gunners' heads down. To my right and slightly forward, Archangel and Goliath sent short lengths of pipe skipping over the asphalt. An explosion forced me to duck, shielding my eyes, and when I could see again, one vehicle remained unharmed, but the other had a scorch mark. Before Steve had a chance to react, the boys lobbed another set, going high this time. The explosions cleared the fog, pushing it back, and I caught a glimpse of a butt snaking over the ground, the round cheek sticking up a bit too high. Steve, heading for the river. I fired, aiming at the soldier's ass, and was gratified to see him shoot forward, splashing into the water. In these temperatures, they weren't likely to die of hypothermia unless they were stupid about the aftermath. This lot managed to be sneaky, utilizing their limited cover to get to safety. Phoenix, next to me, kept the gunners' heads down, giving us a chance to actually implement part of our ambush, though she couldn't stop all the small arms fire. Another pipe bomb flew high, this one aimed at the far side of the Chimeras, where Steve was trying to find safety in the water. The explosion pushed more fog away. Men, hidden by the slope, screamed or whimpered, but the worst were the ones whose cries sounded wet. Return fire from Steve kicked up a notch, forcing us down again. About time to go? Phoenix asked, her head bare inches away as we shared the scant cover of a single tree. Fuck no, not in this mess. Something has to change, though. This explosion rocked the ground, and a fireball rose where the second Chimera used to be. The heat of it flattened us to the ground, along with all the vegetation, removing our cover. It also cleared the last of the fog in our general vicinity. I had seconds to gauge the situation. Half our advanced group lost their cover in the bushes. To my right, Goliath was down, and Archangel, his beanie knocked askew, struggled to lift the giant. Steve, seeing us like sitting ducks, lined up their sights. The only thing I could think of to spoil their aim was to change the distance between us and them. Charge! Suiting actions to words, I slung my rifle over my shoulder, drew a gun and one of the short katana-style swords, and barreled across the short distance between us, screaming the entire way. Panting, I hauled ass up the hill, in a fast bear crawl, hot on Archangel's heels, grief a tight knot in my chest. Death always came too suddenly. I was the last in a line of irregulars strung out up the hill. Ahead, I caught glimpses of Jewel's black hair, still in its battle braids, hanging down Griffin's back. She'd been hit in the charge, dead before she touched the ground. Are they still following us? Archangel gasped. He lugged the large black soldier, Goliath, across his shoulders in a fireman's carry. Goliath was unconscious, but if we can get him to safety, to Eleanor and Squirrel, then he had a chance. Yes, but... I checked the landmarks. It's still a quarter-mile to the second point. I really... He paused, chest heaving while he struggled to catch his breath. Wish we didn't have to do this blind. Because if we'd had drones, unlimited resources, or even fucking radios, we'd have known that those two trucks were in advance for a full caravan heading north and not the usual 1 or 2 truck patrols. Shouts from our pursuers mingled with excited barking. Bastards were using dogs, just like Shrike had warned. I bared my teeth and started up the slope again. Yeah, well, you had intel when you first got here. Fat lot of good that did. We rounded a sharp bend. Oh, give me a second. I just need to... Pausing briefly, I kicked some wooden chocks out from under a bunch of rocks, climbed above them, and, gripping a sturdy branch overhead, stomped on the whole mass. I dangled from the branch when the pile gave way, watching the large rocks bounce and roll down the hill, tearing through Steve's lines. Hours to set up, seconds to dislodge. I cast one more glance down the hill where Jewel, beautiful, bold, opinionated Jewel, had seen her last. I'd known her for over a year now, and now, biting my lip, the physical pain brought me back to the present. No time to give in to grief here. When we were back at the lair, then I could offer my tears up, that someone I'd known was gone. Archangel waited on the path above me, his beanie askew, exposing one ear, reddened by the cold, to the winter air. Goliath's long legs hung around his right arm, and he leaned to the left to compensate for the weight. It's always a crapshoot, he said quietly, offering his hand to help me up a steep section. Grasping his hand allowed me to feel just how cold my fingers were. He held my hand a moment longer than necessary, waiting for me to find my footing. Balancing on the edge of the slope, I tugged his beanie back over his ears, then yanked my gloves out of the pouch and pulled them on. Don't wait around here. I can go faster than you. Get moving. He flicked a small salute and dug his toes into the earth, looking for purchase. Below, the screams and shouts were just beginning to die away. The whining and yelps from the dogs were the worst. I hated hurting them, but it was either that or be caught, which I'd hate even more. 100 yards up the slope and around another bend, fighters slowly exited the obvious trail wherever they could find a spot that wouldn't leave tracks. Every person hauling the injured or dead was accompanied by a second to act as a guard and backup. At the bend, I pulled my secret weapon out of my pack, a bag full of ground black pepper. Amana would be pissed when she discovered I was the one who'd taken it all. Scattering the pepper generously over the path behind me, I followed Archangel as he continued past the exit points. I paused here and there, smudging a print and scattering some fir needles or more black pepper. Satisfied that I'd done what I could in the time I had, I gave it one last look to ensure I hadn't missed anything obvious before stepping through fragrant fir branches onto a route and disappeared off the trail. That chase marked the true start to our campaign to pull Steve out of the mountains. For the first time, we ranged as far west as the coastal mountains, swung north almost to Portland, and back east. Along the way, we fought everyone. Most encounters were hit and run, but sometimes we stopped a little longer, causing some serious damage. Then when we found captives. Once, It was 4 families held at an outpost, working the land plantation style. The overseers, white men wearing the red armbands that marked them as Dorothy. Because North American Liberation Corps is too fucking long to say. Even carried whips, and they liked using them. We left them hanging, overlooking the fields, and burned the buildings. All that, only to be confronted by the former captives huddled together for safety. "Why should we go with you?" asked their spokesman, a man in his 40s. "Nobody helps anyone for free. Not around here." I surveyed my fighters, all of us dusty, sweat-stained, with dirty bandages peeking through torn clothing. Ah, yes, we were glowing examples of humanity. No wonder they didn't trust us on sight alone. The reason for the spokesman's distrust hid behind him. 2 teenaged girls trying desperately to avoid the gazes of the men. "I get you don't trust us," I said, then waved at the black smoke billowing into the sky. "But you sure you want to stay with this? Steve ain't exactly going to be thrilled when they get here, you know." "Not helping," Eleanor murmured, stepping around me and walking slowly towards the families, her hands extended out from her sides, palms facing them. "I know what you're feeling," she said, her voice low and soothing. "Just a year ago, I was almost where you are now." Carefully, using only her thumb and forefinger, she pulled down her waistband, showing the letter K branded on her right hip. Every woman taken by Steve was branded. Over half the fighters had one. I swung back to the vehicles, filled with produce from the small farm sellers. A tiny group, 4 people total, were already herding the animals into the forest. They would take a long, slow route to the lair, and then home, while we drew Steve's eye. "Hurry it up," I called. "We've been here 20 minutes, which is 15 too long." "How would you know?" Dereva jibed. "Not like anybody has a watch." I blew a raspberry at the driver. "Can it? You're just jealous." "Of what?" she taunted. "Your looks? Nope. Driving? Still nope. The only thing you do marginally better than me is beat up poor, unsuspecting Steve." "Brat!" We danced around each other until I got in a shot, smacking her butt hard enough for the crack to carry through the cold air. "Captain!" Eleanor left off convincing the rescued to scold me, going so far as to shake her finger. "Some dignity, please!" "Are they coming or not?" Phoenix shouted from her perch in the back of the GMC. "Because if we leave now, we have a chance of not being chased for 2 days." Within 2 minutes, the families were loaded and we pulled out, taking the beat-up van Dorothy had been using with us. "You know," Eleanor regarded me, her arms crossed, "if you could just stay civil and maybe not say everything that crosses your mind, we wouldn't have to work so hard to convince people to run away with us." We squatted next to the pickup so she could chew me out in privacy. Our camp lay in the middle of a weed-strewn cornfield, half a mile from a nice grove of trees. The vehicles were parked in the valley between 2 shallow hills, our camp spread all around. The dry corn stalks were barely tall enough to provide concealment, and best of all, you had to be in it to realize how much you could fit in there. Good places to camp in the Willamette Valley were like hide and seek. Don't choose the obvious spot and try not to be camp-shaped. Without fires, we simply ate and went to sleep, unless you were getting the 3rd degree from Eleanor. "Bold of you to assume that anything that comes out of my mouth crossed my mind in the first place." I cringed away from Eleanor's playful swipe. "But it's not fair. We just freed them and killed their captors. How much nicer do I need to be?" Eleanor glared at me. Guess that wasn't very convincing. I pouted. "I'll try to be nicer," I said grudgingly. 3 days and another skirmish later, the families didn't look any more comfortable, but they stopped flinching every time I looked their way. That was progress. They were a little happier when we took out a patrol keeping a young woman captive. The families opened their arms to her, and then they slowly warmed up to us. We called the rescued teen Nebula, for the blue ends of her hair, and she became inseparable from Dereva, High Tide, and Sweet Pea. Heaven help me, Dereva was building an army within an army. Before too long, every teenager would be her best friend, and they'd all listen to her. Maybe not such a bad idea. The days blended into an adrenaline-fueled round of running, chasing, hiding, and fighting. Sometimes we had vehicles, sometimes we went on foot. We all suffered minor injuries, and half the time, I couldn't tell where I'd gotten mine. The more seriously injured, like Goliath, were left with the vehicles until they could be taken back to the lair. Every day we became a little more ragged around the edges, and the soles of our boots got thinner. The only things still looking good were our weapons. The nights spent sleeping on cold ground without sleeping pads until I can tell when somebody was The nights were spent sleeping on cold ground without sleeping pads until I can tell when someone was sleeping standing up. We had to double up, two people to a single blanket so that our guests could stay warm. Even with that, they still viewed us as dangerous animals. I huddled over my stove one evening, forced into close proximity by the lay of the land. Around me, fighters snuffled, snorted, and coughed, making the kinds of noises that slowly drove me insane. A hand on my shoulder startled me out of my building rage and crowded mind. I twisted, ready to lash out, only to find Archangel. "Come on," he murmured. "I need to get out of here, and so do you." Gratefully, I ditched my dinner and left my tiny fire to burn itself out in the next minute. Away from the camp and its accompanying noises, the tension flowed out of my shoulders. That's better," he grinned. "I can see your ears now." "Thank you," I smiled slowly. He spread a spare jacket on the ground and held out his hand to help me down. I didn't need it, but any excuse to feel human warmth. I bit my lip when he sat comfortably next to me. "Maybe I just wanted an excuse to get you alone." He gave me a sideways glance and a quick smile. I ducked my head, grinning, and companionably bumped his shoulder. I couldn't resist leaning against him, trying to figure out how to lead into the question I wanted to ask. "Will you spit it out?" he eventually said. "I can hear the gears turning and they're starting to smoke." I blew out a breath. "Okay, but you asked for it." I watched the moon play peekaboo through the clouds. "Why is it that, for a mission this important, only 6 of you had any real experience, while the rest were barely out of basic training? If this mission was so important, and considering how dangerous things are, I would have expected more." He huffed a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "The million-dollar question. We don't know. Hendricks refused to say, but I'd bet an ice cream shop he didn't know. Orders are orders in the military, and we were pulled from different units. I know why I was sent in." "Hmm? Let's just say I pissed the wrong person off," he said easily. I waited, but he kept his mouth shut. I made a small, frustrated sound, but he didn't take the bait. "Fine. But it feels like if we could get an answer to that, things would begin making a lot more sense. The more I learn, the more questions I have." "You and me both." We sat in companionable silence until the cold became too much to ignore. He rose, helping me to my feet. We wandered back to camp, and I sighed. They were asleep. I found Dereva by the pickup, and Archangel bid me good night before going to find his own bunkmate. Squirming down next to my driver, the blanket nearly covered me, but I'd long since learned that as long as my butt and back were warm, I could sleep. The days rolled on. Send the non-combatants and injured back to the lair. Skirmish, run, lure Steve into a trap, stand and fight, steal a car, steal some food. Nights on cold, lumpy ground, not enough blankets, rain, mud, and twice snow in the valley, though it never stuck. I forgot what it was like to be warm, to go to bed without having to wear every item of clothing I'd brought with me. To be clean. Dry socks were worth a fortune, so it's a good thing there weren't any to be had. Anytime I looked at Phoenix, I could practically see her brain fry when she saw Griffin. Who could blame her? The actor turned basher was hot, a good fighter, and kindness radiated off of him. Until he got into a fight. Then he turned stone cold. The female fighters got leaner, meaner, and I saw familiar, angry, single-minded fire in their eyes. They seemed determined to finish the fight this winter, willing to do anything if it meant ending the war right here, right now. Some of them were close to crossing a line they'd never be able to come back from, on the verge of a vicious disregard for the lives of others. So I sicked Eleanor on them. All I had to do was suggest someone might enjoy her company. Then Eleanor would brush their hair, help them with their meals, hold their hand, and talk softly, slowly drawing them out. Eleanor has a capacity to care that is truly terrifying in a wonderful, incredible way. During all this, Steve flailed around, a cumbersome machine that couldn't operate quickly enough to deal with us. More troops flooded the valley to the point we knew they had to be pulling them out of the mountains. Our methods were as odd as our names, and it drove the methodical, logical enemy nuts. Their answer was to make themselves more cumbersome. Now they traveled in convoys, not in small patrols. We'd made too many disappear. Tanks rumbled over the roads daily, tearing up the asphalt and making them difficult to drive on. Assholes. But I'd still take it if it kept them away from the lair. And that ends the chapter. Thank you so much for being here with me. I hope you decide to come back for chapter 8. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe, like, drop a comment, and let me know what you enjoyed. Every little thing helps the channel grow, and really, I just want more people to learn that these books exist. In the meantime, I will maybe see you next week. Next week, I'm traveling because I'm going to a book convention in Ohio. So if you happen to be in the Cincinnati, Ohio area, Happily Indie After is being held there. You can find the link to it in my bio. And who knows? Maybe I'll see you there. I'll be there with all my paperbacks. There are over 160 authors and vendors scheduled to be at this event. And yeah, I hope I see you there.